Welcome to Locked On Lakers for Wednesday. Andy Kamenetzky and special guest Jacob Rude. A pair of preseason games are in the books. And for the Lakers, what's standing out so far? And can Jalen Hood-Schifino take steps forward? That's all coming up next.
You are Locked On Lakers, your daily Los Angeles Lakers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And thanks for making Locked On Lakers your first listen Monday through Friday, wherever you get your podcasts. It's always free. It's never behind a paywall. And Locked On Lakers on YouTube is where you can hang out with a community of over 25,000 subscribers. Active, fun, smart Laker diehards. Subscribe to the audio, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Stay locked in, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet, and you get started with $200 in bonus bets, guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. And Brian is on a flight today, so in his place, bringing in Jacob Rude from Silver Screen and Roll, part of the site's very extensive Lakers coverage. He grades players after every game, and let me tell you something, Jacob's brutal. Like, he basically grades on a reverse curve. He also covers the Indiana Fever for SB Nation, and he used to be the host of Locked On Hoosiers for our network, which means he was very familiar with Jalen Hood-Schifino before it was fashionable for Lakers fans. Want to get into his impressions of JHS before the show is over. Jacob, welcome.
Yeah, it's been a fun preseason so far. The Lakers have been fun. It's the most fun 0-2 start I can remember. So, and Jalen Hood-Schifino's look good, which is great for me personally.
All right, I was going to say, save it. JHS is coming. But you alluded to it. 2 preseason games are in the books for the Lakers. One half of which in a game featured LeBron, AD, and what figures to be the rotation when the season begins, or at the very least until Vando and Christian Wood are back. Your impressions so far in what we've seen in 2 games?
I think the thing that's jumped out to me is the offense and just how much movement there is and how much it seems to flow, and it just looks so different from last year. Even when the Lakers were running plays last year, it didn't seem to have the same amount of just movement all over the court that this offense has through, especially that first half against Phoenix. Both sides of the court, there's movement all over the place, guys going every which direction, and it led to them looking really good in that first half. And 4 of the 5 starters were in double figures, and most of them are only played a little bit into the third quarter. So I came away, especially from that game, a little bit in the first game as well, but definitely in that second game, just impressed at what JJ has already been able to implement with this offense.
We'll get into some more of those details later, but specifically when you talk about the movement that you're seeing in the offense, is there anybody in particular that you feel like that can really benefit?
I think the 2 people, D'Angelo for one, just having him involved in other ways outside of being a standstill shooter, needing the ball to shoot. I think he's really smart with his movements, and you saw it last season at times with his cutting. I think he can flourish in a system in which he's constantly moving, and that's the ask of him, is to constantly be finding those spaces. So I think it'll help him. I also hope that it'll help keep Rui engaged as well. That it seems like the nights when he isn't performing well, he just kind of fades into the background and you just don't really see much from him, and he's just not aggressive. So I would hope that having this kind of offense where you constantly have to be engaged to some level, that keeps him aggressive, keeps him looking for his shot, and there aren't as many of those nights where you're midway through the fourth quarter and, oh yeah, Rui only has 4 shots tonight or something like that.
Yeah, I think it's actually pretty perceptive that you bring up D'Lo and Rui, because those are, I think, kind of sneaky, the 2 of the best cutters on this team. Like, yeah. I think Rui actually relocates I think, as well as anybody on this team. And, that if there's more of an emphasis on making sure that he's actually getting the ball at times, or that guys are keeping an eye out for motion and what to do with it, as opposed to it just sort of being like jazz hands while you're going ISO or running the standard pick and roll. Like I agree with you. It could be a really good way to keep both of those guys more engaged, which is something that often gets said about both of them in terms of things you want to see more of. As far as the movement, are there other things that you're hoping to see more of from this team as the season goes along?
It's kind of a very basic level right now, just kind of seeing how this evolves, how this gets more complex. When you have a basketball sicko like JJ Redick likes to call himself, and someone as smart as LeBron, and there are a number of guys who are, I think, have high IQs for the Lakers. I think there are ways that this can really work for them offensively. D'Lo is a very high IQ player. AD, obviously, really everybody in that starting five. You mentioned Rui kind of cutting off the ball on the baseline, 3-point line to 3-point line. I think he's terrific. So just how this is going to evolve and how this starting five continues to kind of build chemistry together now in this system. That's what has me most excited, because you can already see where they're going to find success in certain areas and in these first two preseason games, in that one half, I guess, that they've played so far. So I'm excited to see just have this structure that this team that's laying the foundation to now and is going to continue to build upon.
It's interesting too. Like, you keep hearing these guys talk about how much they seem to be enjoying that structure, and that can go another way. I mean, I've been doing this long enough that I've heard players, if not openly complain, certainly pretty transparently hint that they feel like trapped by too much structure. They feel constricted by it being too regimented. But, the sweet spot seems to be, at least so far, and again, it cannot emphasize enough, this is very small sample size. The sweet spot seems to be what Redick is going after, and you can just hear it in the way these guys talk about their excitement with getting more to learn, more to absorb. We're having fun with this.
Yeah, I look back to the guys that were running the Princeton offense. I don't think any of them like that under Mike Brown. So
no, they did. I covered those teams. No, they did not.
Exactly. That's why it was very short-lived. But D'Lo's been the one to me that's jumped out from that. He's talking about being on the golf course and texting JJ Redick. He told a story on media day about setting up his son's birthday party and thinking about a play that they had installed. Guys like that. And D'Lo talked about that as well, just wanting that structure. That's not something the Lakers had prioritized. And I wrote about that this week and kind of got to thinking, he's seen 4 different head coaches, 3 different general managers. Like, he's seen a lot of iterations of these Lakers throughout his career, and it's not something that they've ever prioritized. So hearing how much excitement there is from him, all these guys, like you were saying, I think that kind of bleeds into the fans and has them excited in a lot of ways about this.
And again, a reminder, make sure you're checking out Jacob's coverage over at Silver Screen and Roll. Him, Alex Regla, all the guys are just doing terrific coverage with the site. Who has stood out to you, good or bad? Again, always small sample size caveat, but is there anybody in particular who's jumped off the page to you?
Well, I have an answer for both good and bad, and it's the same person in Max Christie, because he had one really good game, but then one really bad game. But I thought Friday against the Timberwolves, there was a lot of Max Christie talk for a player that he admitted he hadn't really proven anything at this point in his career. There was a lot of Max Christie talk, and I thought on Friday he looked the part of the guy that everybody had been talking about to training camp through training camp at that point. So I was impressed with him. And I liked what I had seen from him in that game. Now, he came back on Sunday and was much worse off, especially shooting the ball. So I think that shows there's obviously still room to grow in that regard, but defensively, as much as anything, he's been terrific. And that's also been something that's kind of jumped out, is the defense that the Lakers have been playing and the ball pressure that they've been showing. And Max Christie has been among them, getting steals, knocking the ball loose, guys diving on the floor. But I think this is going to be a big year for Max Christie. He's very much in that 9-man rotation that JJ is going to want to have. And I think he looks, at least so far, every bit the part of the guy that Pelinka and JJ and LeBron have all kind of talked about in a positive way so far.
All right, you mentioned the defense. Coming up next, I want to ask you about a rather bold goal that Anthony Davis set for this team and whether or not it could be realistic on that side of the ball. So we'll get into that coming up next. Locked on Lakers is brought to you by BetterHelp. October is the month where we celebrate wearing masks and costumes, but sometimes it feels like we're wearing a mask and a costume more often than we want to, at work, social settings, around our family. Therapy can help you learn to accept all the parts of yourself so you can take off that mask, because masks are for Halloween fun, but they're not for our emotions. Spooky season should not feel like a year-round event. And I can personally speak to how much therapy helped me and my family during a really difficult period, helping us learn the best ways to communicate, to compromise without feeling unheard or unsatisfied, to learn how to think beyond your own perspective and to become the best version of yourself, not just for yourself, but for the people in your life. And if you're thinking about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's designed entirely online and to be convenient, flexible, suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire and get started with a licensed therapist. And you can switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Take off the mask with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. So Anthony Davis, in a recent practice, I believe, talked about wanting the Lakers to have a top 5 defense in the league, which, I'll be honest, feels unrealistic to me, just because I don't think they have the personnel for that, if nothing else, until Vanderbilt and even to some degree Christian Wood are available again. You may disagree, but either way, how much upside do you think this defense has, like in terms of reaching, if not the level of the offense, because I think everyone expects it to be really supercharged, good enough to where you can think of them as a legit contender?
As much as we kind of talked about throughout the preseason, the structure of the offense, I mean, there being some sort of structure defensively is going to be really important too. And top 5 seems ambitious, but I mean, when JJ talked about picking that starting lineup that he did on the Low Post podcast, he referenced that they were a top 5 defensive unit together during that last season when they played the second half of the season. He talked about how good they were defensively. You look at this team individually, and there are a lot of question marks. I would agree on a lot of players individually, but I think there are some pieces there to get it maybe closer to a top 10 defense, which if they're able to perform offensively as they did last year, that might be enough to be a really good team. But you're going to need, like you said, the Jared Vanderbilts to be healthy sooner than later, Gabe Vincent to stay healthy this year, Max Christie if he's going to make a jump. Austin Reeves has to look a lot more like he did at the beginning of his career when he was a good defender. Last year he struggled a lot. You're going to need Christian Wood to be healthy, just to have that size and that depth at the center position. And that's a lot of caveats I just threw out. So, I mean, I think there is kind of a pathway to it. It's just going to take a lot for them to get there. But I thought it was interesting that AD said it publicly, and it kind of felt like a challenge of sorts to these guys that, hey, this needs to be our goal. He's not someone that necessarily lays out challenges like that all the time or sets kind of goals like that all the time. So I thought it was pretty interesting that he did do that. And Darius Soriano wrote for the site about that, and he said the last time he did something like this was before the title winning season, when he said he wanted LeBron on an all defense team, and then he went out and that team defensively was really good. There was obviously a lot of pieces to that team that made them really good as well, but I thought it was really interesting he said that, and hopefully a sign of something he sees or a sign of what he thinks the Lakers can be on that end.
Side note, I'm glad you mentioned Darius because he's another guy this side I absolutely needed to shout out as well. It's interesting when you bring up the 2020 team, and they were quite good defensively. And in retrospect, certain elements of it seem obvious, but I remember at the time not thinking that they projected quite as good on paper as they ended up being in actuality. And that, there were details like Kyle Kuzma being a better defender than he had been to that point in his career. Dwight Howard, you didn't quite know what you were going to get in him. I mean, he was really, really close to being out of the league at that point. It's become, I think, pretty easy to forget that. You didn't know exactly what JaVale was going to be. Caruso took steps forward. Getting Markieff Morris helped. So I think those pieces, especially in retrospect, have more defensive potential than this group. But sometimes you can find ways to create a sum that's greater than what the parts seem. And the flip side is the lift for this team defensively doesn't necessarily have to be as high because they are so much better offensively than this group. And I wonder if maybe some of the way that they can fix certain elements in their defense just comes through their offense. Like just a functional offense where the other team is taking the ball out of the basket on an awful lot of trips. That, I don't want to say solves defensive issues, but it makes defensive issues easier when you're not continually defending on your heels.
Yeah, that's a point I thought as well when he said that, is that just having a good offense, it takes away. The Lakers were awful in transition last year, and
yes, they were.
You don't have those opportunities if you're making more shots, and it's things like that. If, like you said, they're taking the ball out of bounds, you get back and you're set defensively, and you have your matchups, and you're not cross match or anything like that. Just a lot of those small things add up for 2, 4, 6, 8, however many points per game, and suddenly you're climbing up the standings from being I don't remember where they ranked last year, but climbing up the standings to being a top 15, top 10 defense. So I think it's a lot of small things that this team can do to hopefully that all add up, which is kind of what they're doing. They talked about they're doing offensively as well, is just a lot of these small things to get you small advantages, and you start adding those up and they become one big advantage. So I think it could be something like that defensively, because I think if they're going to be a top 5, top 10, top whatever defense, it's going to be the sum is greater than the whole of its parts.
I don't know if you've had a chance to see John Schumann over at NBA.com. He does his annual NBA GM survey. It came out on Tuesday, and I'm going to save a deeper dive for this for when Brian is back in town. But something that jumped out at me more than anything else, Jacob, is how little the Lakers or players really came up in the survey at all, except for this one question where they led the voting. Which team's level of success this season is toughest to predict? Number 1, your Los Angeles Lakers at 17%. The Rockets and Pelicans were tied behind them at 13%. Phoenix at 4%, which I think is interesting. I think Phoenix is getting a lot of benefit of the doubt that I don't understand.
Very much so.
And then tied for 5th is the Mavericks and the Sixers. Do you consider this team difficult to get a beat on? Because I see them as a team where their ceiling and their floor can feel simultaneously high and simultaneously low.
Yeah, I think a lot of that is baked into just not knowing what you're getting with JJ Redick. And I think that alone makes it hard to see what this team is going to be. They also were just a weird team last year too, just basing it off that. They looked really good in the in-season tournament, and then they had 3 weeks where they were one of the worst teams in the league, and then they looked really good from the trade deadline on. Which version of that team is it going to be this season? So I think kind of the roller coaster nature of last season paired with having a first-time head coach. I hadn't seen the survey yet, but I'm not surprised that they're number one, because I mean, right now I don't really know what to predict of them. I
think they're going to be good. Like I do think they're going to be.
I do too.
But it's funny if you asked me, do I think it's possible that they could be a top 4 team? I'd say yes. I don't think it's probable, but I think it's possible. A lot needs to break right. But if it did, I think the ceiling's high enough for that. If you asked me, do I think they could miss the playoffs? I'd say yes. I don't think it's probable. If I had to bet on them making it or not, I'd bet on them making it. But it's not impossible. And if you ask me, do I think they're ultimately just going to end up in that dogfight between about seeds 5 through 12, which is going to be messy as hell? I'd say, yeah, that's where I would peg them. And who knows what emerges from that chaos. And I think that just sort of speaks to where the Lakers are. In the meantime, everybody's just terrified that one bad injury could come for LeBron already. You may have heard, Jacob, LeBron's turning 40 this year.
He's I've heard that once or twice. I've seen that he's older than his career has lasted longer than a lot of people in the NBA at this point.
Yeah. All right. You may be, as far as folks who cover the Lakers, the reigning Jalen Hood-Schifino expert. Last season was tumultuous, disappointing for Jalen Hood-Schifino, but you may remember, you came on with us after the Lakers drafted him, very high on him. I want to get some of your thoughts on JHS heading into this season, because I actually think it matters. So we're going to into that coming up next. Locked on Lakers is brought to you by FanDuel. NFL fans, you can have the season of your life with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So let's just say you're watching a game and it feels like you are predicting everything before it happens. Every big pass, every big sack, who's going to get the ball when, for how many yards, whatever. You can confirm those hunches with the latest stats, live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets with FanDuel. Plus, you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. And we are getting closer to the 24-25 NBA season. Our friends at FanDuel have options for you. As of this recording, the Lakers are 35-1 to win the championship. Anthony Davis 150-1 for MVP, also 25-1 for Defensive Player of the Year. Dalton Knecht 10-1 for Rookie of the Year. Max Christie 150-1 for Most Improved Player. That's FanDuel.com. So like we were saying before, Jacob, you were very familiar with JHS, having covered him at Indiana. And if I remember correctly, and correct me if I am misremembering, you were pretty high on his potential in the NBA. Last season was brutal for him on a few fronts, between him understandingly not being ready as a one-and-done 19-year-old point guard, but then Gabe Vincent getting hurt turned that lack of readiness into a problem. The injuries, the back surgery, Jaime Jaquez and Brandon Bajemski taking right after him and immediately playing key roles for the Heat and the Warriors. He missed the Summer League. These last two preseason games are the first time we've seen him on the court, I think, since early March. Yep. What have been your impressions of JHS so far?
Maybe a sense of relief that he still looks the part, because last season was tough. Even having high expectations for him, I didn't really think he was going to contribute a lot last season, even if he had been healthy, and he was far from healthy. And like you said, the Lakers as a whole weren't healthy, so the fact that he wasn't ready, he wasn't able to really contribute the handful of times they had him out there, it was rough to say the least. So the fact that he's healthy and just looks like he did in college, and just kind of building off that, I think is a big positive in a number of ways. I'm sure to him as well, it's probably been some sort of sense of relief that he can get back on the court and actually play meaningful, however meaningful preseason games are, but just play games again. And something like you said, the last time he was playing was probably in the G League. And so it was a rough season. There were those enough flashes in the G League that I still had hope, but you would have, if you would have told me at the beginning or back last year that his flashes were going to be in the G League, then
right.
Yeah, you would have thought something went really wrong. So I have been happy to see how he's contributed in the minutes he's gotten. And yeah, I think this could be a big season for him. When JJ's been talking about these 9-man rotations and the competition for those final spots, Jalen's name has come up. I still think it's a pretty big outside shot right now, but that his name is even coming up in those conversations right now, I think is a big testament to how hard he's been working this summer.
Do you have any concerns that what you liked about him as a college player may not translate at this level, or that he couldn't develop other skills necessary to complement, I guess, what would be considered his strengths right now?
One of my bigger concerns is that his biggest weakness was his jumper, as everybody kind of saw his 3-point shot. You would hope that in a rookie year that if you didn't play a lot, you'd be able to work on that. And the injuries meant he couldn't, and the back surgery in March really meant he probably wasn't out there shooting 3-pointers in the gym. I don't know when exactly he got back into the gym, but it does sound like he was back around the team around Summer League. I thought it was interesting. I was worried at first that him not playing in Summer League wasn't great, and I think ideally everybody.
So was I.
Yeah. I wasn't alone in that. But it sounds like, kind of reading between the lines on some of the comments they've made, that he was back working around then. I think they just wanted to play it safe and not have him playing games then. But I am worried about the jumper. There's been the workout videos of him changing his form and whatnot, and I don't put hardly anything into those until you actually see it in a game. There's been a very, very small sample size. He's taken 2 3-pointers, so I have no idea what it looks like in a game yet. So that's been the biggest thing. That's going to be kind of the swing skill for whether he's going to be able to really play. The other stuff I haven't worried too much about. I've been actually a little bit more impressed with his ability to organize the offense and play make and that type of stuff. That he did that in college, and I've been impressed that as a 20-year-old or a 21-year-old, however old he is, that he's been able to translate that so early in his second preseason.
Yeah, and his development this season matters. And you mentioned the outside chance of him being in the rotation and it being more outside than chance. And I tend to agree with you, but his ability to get on the court at all and potentially contribute, like, it matters in the sense that if you want the Lakers to be able to move either D'Lo or Gabe Vincent to upgrade somewhere else, they need him to be a viable enough ball handler, like a viable enough fourth guard that you could put out there and things don't fall apart. Or if he looks like an NBA player in the making that just needs more reps than he would ever get on this team, then all of a sudden he potentially gains trade value as the piece that you move to try to upgrade somewhere else. But like, one way or the other, it obviously would help the Lakers if he could contribute on the court. But if you're looking for even the ancillary ways that the Lakers can try to improve this season, JHS being a viable enough NBA player this season, I think may get slept on in terms of its importance.
Yeah, and I was talking to a friend about this, I think, during the Suns game, and that maybe not best case scenario, but I think there is a scenario where the Lakers have one of their young guards, whether it's JHS, Dalton Connect, one of those guys who are kind of on the outside of the rotation looking in, they really start to develop into something where they they need minutes, and they need to be in the rotation, because then you are able to more comfortably trade D'Lo or Gabe Vincent for a center and not another guard.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of been the problem, and it was last year at the trade deadline, is that trading D'Lo, you needed another guard there. You were losing so much in terms of
Reeves needs to take a hell of a jump as a playmaker and facilitator, which, I mean, I think he's good, but I don't think he's not as good at it as D'Lo.
No.
And I am not yet comfortable with Austin having that type of responsibility. So unless Austin takes that leap, you need somebody to keep moving up, and that involves JHS.
Yeah. And so I think that is the scenario that probably helps the Lakers the most, is that one of those guys, probably JHS, like you said, because he's an actual ball handler, becomes a good enough player that you trust him with 10, 12, 14, however many minutes, rotation minutes in a game, and then you can go move one of the guards you have, probably D'Lo, because he's an expiring, for a center that can back up AD, play with AD, something like that. So, yeah, I do agree that JHS's development does matter on this team, and I certainly agree that it's kind of flown under the radar. It was such a frustrating rookie season that I think a lot of people were just kind of out of sight, out of mind with him by the time summer came around, and he wasn't someone that was talked about a whole lot in that regard. So I was happy to see JJ talking about him and Max Christie as guys who had worked real hard and improved a lot during the summer. He's talked about those guys that have been in the gym all summer are kind of at a head start right now in a lot of ways versus everyone else. And I think you're seeing that with both of those guys, and that they have, it seems like, a better understanding of what their roles are going to be in this offense. And it's kind of jumped off the paper a little bit, or jumped off the screen, I guess, a little bit, watching them play so far this preseason.
Last question about JHS for you. I asked him during media day, given that he missed so much of last year, if there had been any clarification about whether the plan for him was to spend more time with the big club or actually sometime with South Bay, just getting him reps and kind of trying to fast track what he didn't get to do last year. And he said it was not clarified. Whether that's actually the case or not, I don't know. But from your perspective, what do you think would be better for either him, the team, both?
I'm interested in seeing how that plays out, because JJ gave some interesting quotes. It was either on the Low Post or at his media press conference. Those were back-to-back days. But he talked about the Lakers should be kind of the model of the NBA in terms of integrating the G League and the parent club, because the G League plays in its practice facility. So I think a combination of both might be the answer. And I'm interested to see how JJ uses the G League this year. If we see guys like Jalen or maybe Dalton Connect or whoever it might be, just play a game in the G League just to get those reps.
Yeah.
And because you saw it a little bit at times throughout the years where they would send Kendrick Nunn down or Wayne Ellington down to get a practice. And it's hard to replicate that in with NBA teams. They don't practice the same way that G League teams might. But I thought those comments were interesting and made me wonder if there might be more kind of guys moving back and forth, where if the situation is right and the South Bay's playing and the Lakers don't play for 2 days after that, why not have them play a game at South Bay and get those reps? So obviously I think big league minutes, the NBA minutes are what he needs the most, but I think any minutes probably help him and help a lot of guys at this point. Even if you're going to the G League and you're having a lot of success, it's still better to do that, I think, than just sit on the bench and not really do a whole lot. So, but overall, I'm really interested in seeing how JJ uses South Bay this year.
He is Jacob Rude. You can follow him on Twitter at Jacob Rude. You can read his coverage of the Lakers, Silver Screen and Roll, part of just a terrific site of Lakers coverage. He's also covering the Indiana Fever as well for SB Nation. Appreciate the time, Jacob. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Anytime.
Brian will be back on Thursday. We'll talk more about John Schumann's NBA survey, NBA GM survey, and also probably get into Baxter Holmes's very in-depth piece about Bronny James and the league consensus about him. So that is coming up Thursday. See everyone then.